All right. Our lives are on a short timer. All right. Zak the Mishnah. All right. So today is Daf Pei Hey. Naya Mishnah. Mr. Marilus used to say that all the time. So we started, then we already. All right. So Mishnah. Naya Mishnah and Pei Hey. Today's Daf's Pei Hey. Pei Hey and Aleph around I don't know 25% of the way down. Harei at Muteres l'chol adam. So we continue in this discussion where he says to her, "Okay, here's your get. You're mutter to everybody. Ella li'abu levicha, except to your father, my father, la'achi, la'achicha, my brother, your brother, and all these are kares, right? All these are kares. Le'eved or la'avi kachavim, or to a slave, or avi kachavim." All these examples of if she attempts to go ahead and marry one of these people, the kedushin is not chal. So therefore, Randy jumped off, right? So therefore, oh okay, no, I'm gonna so right, right. So therefore, we say in this case that he didn't leave anything out, because she's already prohibited. It's like, okay, I'm divorced. You can marry anybody you want except for the wall, right? It doesn't do anything, right? So therefore, it's kosher. If he says you're permitted to everybody except Ella, Almana, let's say she was an Almana she was widowed from a previous marriage. Is divorced here now. Ella Almana Kohen Gadol, can't go ahead and marry a Kohen Gadol, or Grusha Chutz a Kohen Hedyot. Or let's say she's going to be a grusha or a chalutza to a regular kohen, mamzeres nesina Yisrael, or a mamzeres nesina to if she was a mamzeres nesina to a Yisrael, or if she was a bas Yisrael, a mamzeres nesin. Anything where kedushin would be chal, even through with an aveira, but the kedushin does work. Possible, then it's possible because he's limiting her marriage ability.
So remind me here about the obed compulsion. Is there a law? There's no condition are cooking with the obed compulsion.
Right.
So does that mean that goy when somebody's not Jewish?
Yeah.
Or if it's a Jew that does a
not Jewish, there is the kedushin is not chal.
We're talking about akum in the respect of a goy.
Yes. So the kedushin is not chal.
All right, got it.
So right, like an Evan. So the Gemara says Zak the Gemara. So klala dereisha. So the rule in the reisha, right? End up with the rule. It says l'chom yishein kedushin, right? So klala dereisha. Lasu yishar chavi krisis, to include all cases of chavi krisis. If there is a kares prohibition of the man to have relations with the woman, then which chav kares, then the kedushin will not be chal. And klala the sefer. The rule of the sefer was right. Chom yishayes of kedushin afilu be'avera. Comes to include to include other types of labin. Right. Skip the parentheses. So Rav Nachman. Let's say he says there you are mutter chutz mekedushay cotton, but you can't go ahead and marry a cotton. Mahu. Do we say that is lacking? Mirman. Do we say hashal miyalav barahavya? Do we say that now he doesn't have the ability to go ahead and marry her, and therefore she's not lacking in anything? Right, or eventually he's going to become a gadol, and therefore now, right, she's forbidden to this cotton, even though he's a cotton now, doesn't do anything. But in 3 years, when he's ready bar mitzvah, he's now limiting her to who she can marry. So we actually can learn this answer from a brisa. What is the brisa? Katana misgareshes, b'kedushi avia. A katana, a girl who's a minor who was married off by her father, she can go ahead and be divorced from the kedushin of her father. So why is that the case? Right? So just like if she comes in, she goes out, she came in with her father. So why should she be able to go ahead and accept the get? Because eventually she's going to be old enough to get her get. So therefore she can now accept her get now. So over here, that even though this cotton is now 11 years old, but in a couple of years, he's going to go ahead and be old enough. And therefore, he's going to be old enough. Therefore, it would be limiting in her freedom. If he says you are permitted to go ahead and marry anybody who's alive now, but no one that's not alive yet, that's going to be born after this day of divorce. Now she's not limited to whoever she wants to marry in the world. Then in the future they're going to have to be born, and therefore she's going to be limited in his divorce. Similarly, let's attempt to go ahead and learn from this brisa. So he said in our Mishnah that if he says, right, you can go ahead and marry whoever you want, except for this Eved or this Avi Kechavim, that didn't limit her because there is no kedushin with them. Now, Misa Avi Kechavim, Nami Avidi the Migari. So, if they want, the Eved, or I guess you can have his freedom and they go to the mikvah, or the other covenant could go ahead and convert. So if he says you can't go ahead and marry this guy, right? This guy, Bob, right? So Bob's a guy. So our Mishnah says he's not limiting her, but let's say the guy, Bob, converts. So now he is limiting her. So why does the Mishnah say it works? It's a limited type, right? So what do you see from over here? So same thing in our case. So it should be considered to be limiting. Yeah, then it'll be to that person.
All these cases say you're limited to anybody who's under the king now forever. So they're
No, so this person, well, so right to the case of the katan, you're right. That was the question. And I was right now, but the katan is this. But in the case of the katan, we said this person, this boy who's 11, you can't marry him. But he's 14, he'll be able to go ahead and marry.
Should be considered just as they're not considered
Right. So maybe it's a new person, right? So maybe it's a new person. It's not considered to be the old. So over here, right, we do consider the person to be the same individual, right? But certain halachas, you're right. Certain halachas parameters, we say it's kikatim shanoah dami, right? He's like a newborn child. Abraham, you're good friends here. So they say, so the Gemara says, it's the same thing. Only kavim works, so too over here, this should work. So when an Ovei Kechavim, he's not destined to go ahead and convert. Maybe he convert, maybe he won't, so he's not destined. However, Hani, but anybody that's born after this date is going to be born. So therefore, that's inevitable. So therefore, since that's automatic, so therefore maybe that's a different case. So let's say he says, you can marry whoever you want, except for, right, your sister's husband. Now, the sister's husband can marry her only after his wife's death. Do we say, do we say that her brother-in-law is not fit for her right now and therefore it's not lacking anything? Or maybe the sister will die and therefore now she'll be permitted to go ahead and marry the husband, and therefore maybe it is limiting her ability to go ahead and marry. So let's attempt to learn from a brisa. It says, so it says, Eved is not lacking in anything. It works. The kedushin works if he says because they're the kedushin. Nami Avida. So you say, but they can convert. So they can convert. Nevertheless, we say that it's not considered to be lacking. So to over here, we should say that it's not considered to be lacking. If the sister does die, then okay. So then in that case, she won't be able to marry him, but it's not lacking. Gemara says no. Geras l'shchichi misa shchich. Geras is not shchiach, but misa is. So you want to argue that maybe she'll die before the sister, right?
People die all the time.
Right, but now this one to die. But who says this one? Right, and who says she'll die before the sister? Okay, I hear. So he says, "Chutz mizmasayich." Right, you can go ahead and marry whoever you want, but you can't have snus. Mahu. B'nesuin holo shire. He's not limiting her and who she can marry. Ideal shire babia, or maybe she's lacking in her bia. Samalei tanisua. So let's learn. It says alaba levicha. So he said in the Mishnah, if he says to your father or my father, it's not lacking anything. So, but what are you talking about? If we're talking about marrying the father or the brother, right? Can they go ahead and get married? No. Elalav is nus, right? We'll say with it's nus. It only says the father and my father and your father, he's not leaving out. But if you would say he's nus with somebody else, it would be shire. So over here, you can't say chutz l'snasayich. The Gemara says no. No, perhaps we are talking about they tried to go ahead and attempt to do a kedushin, and we're not talking about snus. So he says, he says, okay, I'll divorce you, chutz mishaloi kedarka, except for a case of that you can no longer have bia shaloi kedarka. Mahu the kedarka aloi shayr. He's not living here in kedarka. Dilba mishka v'isha ksiv. Or maybe it says all the mishka v'isha, and therefore they're all the same, and therefore he's limiting her. Or what if he says chutz mevaros nedareich? What if he says, okay, you can go ahead and here's your divorce, but however, I still control your vows. Mahu. But soon he's not limiting her, she can marry. Or perhaps that now when she marries somebody else, his kinyan of her is lacking because he can't go ahead and revoke her vows. And I feel you get where the Gemara is going with the teretz, because now it is pounding all the questions. Let's say, okay, but you can marry whoever you want, but if you marry Kohen, you can't go ahead and eat the truma. But as soon as she can marry whoever she wants, or perhaps that when a Kohen goes out and marries her, his kinyan is lacking, and therefore he is limiting her the divorce. And chutz mishusayich. What if he says, okay, but I'll still inherit you, Mahu, but as soon as he's not leaving her out and for who she can marry. Or perhaps that when she marries somebody else, once again, that kid is lacking. And chutz mikdushaych Mahu. What if he says, okay, you can go ahead and marry whoever you want. However, you can't go ahead and marry with a shtar. You want to go ahead and be Mekadesh with Bia, Mekadesh with Kesav, that works, but not with a shtar. Mahu. She can go ahead and still marry Since we learned over there that they're all compared to one another, so therefore he's limiting her ability to go ahead and get married by not being able to go ahead and be Mekadesh B'shtar. So the right answer is with a taker. Fine. Now in Mishnah, bottom line on Pei Hey Amud Aleph. Mishnah says, Gufel shall get. What is the essence of the get? Harei at muteres l'chol adam. If one says, just writes that, you are permitted to any man, that's sufficient. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, he says, the din, or the done, right? And this, dihavi lechi minoi, right? To be to you from me, Sefer Terichun, a book of banishment, the Geras Shivukin, and a letter of Shivukin of abandonment, the Get Turin, right? And a document to release her. Right? So he says for you to go, at least nafsa, to be married, l'chol gaver disyatzvain, right? That anybody you want. Right? I went slow and read this carefully because the Gemara's the later on, when we have our part to tell how the second to write it, it's meduyik and all these words. So that is the get. They'll soon see that Rabbi Yehuda. That's even a longer version, as the Gemara will point out, because it's words that they point out that are not written here in the Mishnah. But that basically, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you need this entire text in there. So that was the get by a woman. Now get by a gufo shall get shichra. What is the essence of a get shichra? Harei ad b'chayrim. You are a baschayrim, right? And Hare, or he says Hare as lasmacha, you are to yourself, right? Those are all the essence of a get shecher. Fine. So we have the Mishnah, Rabbanan say just Tanakama says Hare mutar l'chol adam. Rabbi Yehuda says no, you got to say all this this language, and then we said the gufo shogeh, the shecher is Hare as b'charin or Hare as asmacha. Now, zok the Gemara. If a man says to his wife or writes it right in the get, you are a bascharin, right, a free woman. It's obvious that this is not a lashon of divorce, and therefore he hasn't done anything. Or if he says, he says to a shifcha, you are noted to any man, also however, let's say he says to his wife, you are to yourself, right? And that was the lashon we had by Gufa Shoget Shifcha. Mahu, is it legamri kamarla? Is he saying you are to yourself, meaning your isha, so you can go ahead and marry you want? Maybe he's saying that you can keep your wages. So kamarla. So Ravina Lervashi Tashmak. Listen, it's not within the Mishnah. The essence of a get shichur is you are a free free person, or you are to yourself. And an evet, which is owned by the master. So he says, you are to yourself, she acquires herself. So say a woman who is not, own her, is not obvious. So therefore, he says it's pashut that Harias Atzmacha would go ahead and divorce. The guy says to his Eved, I have no dealings with you. Right? I have no business with you. Anyways, some of the Rav Chanan, the Rav Ashi, some say Rav Chanan, Mechuzana, the Rav Ashi. So Tashma, come listen. The Tanya, we're learning a brayso. One who goes ahead and sells his Avdor Avichavim, Yotza Lecheros, he goes free, right? One is not allowed to go outside his Avichavim because he's basically dismissing him from certain mitzvahs. And therefore, Yotza Lecheros. But Tzarech get Shikhr, and he needs to get Shikhr, may Rabba Rishon from his first master. And Arashigam Leal, but Medvarmu, when does he need one? Shalei Kasav of Oino. He didn't write him an Ono. About Kasav of Oino, which is to explain what it is. Zeo Shichuro. That was his basically his get Shikhr. And my Ono, what does it mean to run of Ono? So Rav Sheshes Dichsiv Livarech Mimenu. If you run away from him, Ainli Asik B'cha. I have no dealings with you. So we see over here clearly that the lashon of Ainli Asik B'cha is a lashon of Shikhr when it comes to an Evan. Fine. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah says V'dan, right? This the Lachim Inai Sefer Tirichun the Geras Shemuk. So b'mai kamifli, what's this machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda? So Rabbanan Savri Yadayim Shem Chichas Havidayim. Rabbanan hold that something which is not clearly written out, right? Nevertheless, since it hints to what it's talking about, it's valid. And therefore, in this case, right, Harei Amateres Chaladam doesn't necessarily exactly say what it's talking about. So there, nevertheless, Rabbanan say this is considered a yad. It doesn't exactly point out what it's talking about. We can make an assumption. Even though he doesn't say with this, right, with this star, nevertheless, the Bahai Gita Kamagarisha. And nevertheless, it's pretty obvious that he's divorcing her with his document. And Rabbi Yehuda Savar, and Rabbi Yehuda holds, Yadayim Shem Chichas Lo Havi Yadayim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, that if it's not clear, then it's ambiguous, and therefore it's not effective for a get, right? And Lo Havi Yadayim, but Tam the cost of Lo Havi did. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to write, and this, with this paper, the Muchach most of the Bahai Gita Kamagarish, because only if he says with this, i.e., with this piece of paper, that's the instrument I'm using to go ahead and divorce you. About Laikas of London did. If he doesn't say it done, right, and this, people might say that really he tried to divorce her just verbally. And this get is just proof that it was done. But maybe if he doesn't say in this, so therefore, how was written on paper, maybe that was just proof that he tried to divorce her verbally. So therefore, since it's Dashi B'chichas Lo Havi Yadayim, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to write it all out. Fine. Amar Rabbi. Now comes a little lesson for those who are Gittin. Haima the kas of Gita, Lo Lichta the din. Should not throw a yud in there. The mashma of a din, because it's mashma that like, oh, it's by law I have to do this, right? It's not law, you don't have to divorce, right? I love it done, rather be done without the yud. Lo lichna igeres. Don't write the word igeres with the yud. The mashma igeres with a gares, which is a roof. Ella igeres, right, without a yud. Lo lichna lemihach. And he says, right, which is the word means to go, right? That was the word in the Mishnah, right? I believe it's to go. And don't write lo lemihach. The mashma, right? Li mehach, right? It was to me from this, right? The loy lichta lemachach, the mashma kichucha lemachach, right? Without the, I guess it was written, yeah, with a ches instead of a hey. So then it sounds like he's making kichucha, right? Like a mockery, a joke. And then when he writes the words titi havan, the tzabian, right? These words, so now both these don't appear in our Mishnah. That's what I was saying, that there's more words that are written in our Mishnah, right? Which those were noeg to put in. So when you write these words of the tihavian, right? The yobi and the yatzvian, right? So tlasa yudim. Each one should have 3 yudin together, right, at the end, right? Why? Why is that? Because if not, there's only 2. Then it says, right? Then you will be permitted, and you will with 3 it means you will be permitted and you will want, right? As opposed to if it's only 2, then it's mashma than others, right? That she's permitted to go ahead, who she wants. So therefore, you need 3 yuds in there, and levav the terechun, levav the shivukin, right? And go ahead and also extend the vav in teruchin, and also the vav in shivukin, right? For releasing and banisher to mashma terichin v'shavikin. Right, in order to be understood as without the yuds, then it refers to a banished woman, or someone in general, or a woman who was released in general. Also, right, and also the vav of chadu, which means from now. Right now, you'll be permitted to marry whoever you want, because if it looks like if it's not a long vav, then it will look like a yud l'chadi, the mashma chadi, which means for nothing. Lo lichta leitzaba, and don't write leitzaba with an aleph. The mashma lo yinasba, which sounds like you can't marry. Ella lisnaba, rather write lisnaba without the aleph. Fine. So that was some pointers for Sefer Gimel. Iboilu, a question was raised. Sabina Vadan, Alobina Vadan. Do you have to go ahead and write with this or not? So Tashma can listen. Yiskin Rabba Begite. So Rabba was Misakein for Gittin. Ach Pladia Pladia. So we so and so Pater V'Tarich Yas Pladisa Isa, right, that he released, right, and sent away, right, this certain woman. The Havad Idse Min Kadam Dana, right, who was his wife before this. From now until forever, right? He also added those words in. It doesn't say over here, Vidan in the beginning with this. Because it's did he put in all those other words that Rabbi Yehuda said? That whole thing. He didn't put it in. So now he's leaving out words. So just like over there, you have to put in all those words. So too, you also have to put in the words Vidan, and that Rava wasn't being exact in limiting his words. So we're just going to go to the Mishnah on the Amud Beis. So, and by the way, pointing on from this day, you have to write in there from this day and on, because this was because according to Rabbi Yossi, he says you don't have to do it because just look at the date of the star. So therefore, nevertheless, you have to write in it. And forever, they have fuke. Turn the page, right? To exclude or to answer the question, right? Someone wants to know, okay. What if a person says, hey, you're divorced to me for today, but tomorrow you're my wife again, right? Can't one do that? So that is no good, because we over here, it has to be written the get forever, and therefore forever is not one day. And gufo shel shtar shicher harei as baschorin harei alias. So the essence of the get shicher is you are a baschorin, or you're to yourself. So iskin Rav Yehuda b'shtar zvine davidi. So Rabbi Yehuda was masakein in a shtar of a sale of avadim, that one should go ahead and write avda danan, right? Our slave mustak leavdo, right? He is said he's mustak for avdus, right? To be a slave, slavery. Upatir ve'atir min chariri, and he's exempt, and there is no he has no freedom, right? He's pater from freedom. I completely own him. Or also for any claims from anybody else. Rule Malka Malkasa, and also for the king and queens, they also don't own him. Right, and there's nobody else who has any sort of avdus upon him. I don't own him with anybody else. He's mine completely. And he doesn't have any blemishes. Right, and he won't have any more of these these boils for the next 2 years. Boils would return in 2 years, and therefore he got a boil within 2 years. It was known he had one, so he's basically claiming that he never had any movement, he never had any boils. And what do you do for boils? So my asfase. So how can you go ahead and cure it? So Abaye says you take some gidba umakta v'chavrisa. Go ahead and take some ginger, some silver, and some some sulfur, the chamra, and you go ahead and take vinegar from wine, umishcha, the zesa and olive oil, the natmik chira, right? And a white, white naphtha. And also something I guess from a plant. Is that from a plant? I assume. Yeah. That was cress. Okay. Nevertheless, you take that. The shai filet, the gadfa diasin. You go ahead and you put it with some nice, good old goose feather, and you put it all together, and then you apply it to the boils, and that should remove these boils. All right, we'll stop here at the Mishnah. So tomorrow at Hashem, we will go ahead and continue from here. Everyone have a wonderful day. Shkeach.